If you've spent any time learning photography, you've almost certainly heard someone talk about the rule of thirds. It's often one of the very first techniques beginners are taught, and for many people it becomes something they try to apply to every single photograph they take. But here's the interesting part. The rule of thirds isn't really a rule at all. It's simply an observation about the way our eyes naturally explore an image. Imagine looking out of a large window. Do your eyes immediately lock onto the exact center of the view? Probably not. Your attention moves around the scene. You notice a tree, a person walking, a mountain in the distance, or a shaft of sunlight breaking through the clouds. Our brains are constantly searching for points of interest, and those points really feel most comfortable when they are placed directly in the middle of the frame. The rule of thirds simply divides your photograph into 9 equal sections using 2 horizontal lines and 2 vertical lines. Where those lines cross are 4 natural points of visual interest. Placing your main subject near one of those intersections often creates an image that feels more balanced, more dynamic, and more engaging than placing everything directly in the center. But why does this happen? Part of the answer lies in the way our brains process information. When a subject sits perfectly in the middle of the frame, the composition often feels stable and symmetrical. That's useful for some photographs, but it can also feel predictable. Moving the subject slightly away from the center creates a small amount of visual tension. Suddenly, the eye begins to explore the rest of the image. The empty space around the subject becomes part of the story instead of simply being background. Think about a portrait. If the person's face is positioned slightly to one side while they're looking into the open space of the frame, the image feels natural. It gives the viewer somewhere to look. It creates a sense of direction and anticipation. Now imagine placing that same person on the edge of the frame while they're looking out of the photograph. Suddenly, the composition feels uncomfortable because the viewer's attention is being pushed out of the image instead of being invited to stay inside it. Landscape photographers use the rule of thirds in much the same way. If the sky is spectacular, they may place the horizon along the lower third, allowing the clouds and light to dominate the photograph. If the foreground tells the strongest story, they move the horizon to the upper third, giving the land more space to breathe. Neither choice is right or wrong. The decision depends entirely on what the photographer wants you to notice first. One mistake beginners often make is treating the rule of thirds like mathematics. They spend more time lining up the grid than actually looking at the scene. Photography should never become an exercise in measuring boxes. The grid is simply a guide that helps you recognize balance. Once you begin seeing that balance naturally, you won't need the grid anymore. In fact, some of the greatest photographs ever taken completely ignore the rule of thirds. A perfectly centered portrait can feel powerful and formal. Symmetry can create a sense of calm and order. Fashion photographers often place the subjects directly in the middle to create strength and confidence. Architectural photographers regularly use symmetry to emphasize design. Breaking the rule of thirds isn't a mistake when it's done intentionally. The important question is never, am I following the rule? The real question is, does this composition strengthen the story I'm trying to tell? If placing our subject in the center makes the image more powerful, then that's exactly where it belongs. Here's a simple exercise you can try today. Photograph the same subject 3 times. Place them directly in the center for the first image. Position them on one of the rule of thirds intersections for the second. Finally, ignore both approaches and compose the photograph in whatever way feels most natural to you. When you compare the 3 images, don't ask which one follows the rule. Ask which one tells the better story. That's one of the most important lessons in photography. Rules are wonderful teachers, but they make poor masters. Learn them, understand why they exist, and then give yourself permission to break them whenever the story demands it. In our next lesson, we'll explore leading lines and discover how photographers quietly guide your eyes through a photograph without you ever realizing it's happening. Once you notice leading lines, you'll start seeing them everywhere.